My name is Charmaine, and on my wedding morning, my future sister-in-law secretly handed me a typed list of wife duties. I looked her dead in the eye, asked one single question, and then walked out of the church in my custom wedding dress. I called off the entire wedding, kept the house I bought with my own hard-earned cash, and walked away with the full $400,000 my in-laws were desperately trying to steal. They called my phone 70 times that day. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your worth and tried to use you for your success. Trust me, you are going to love how I handled this. The bridal suite at the First Baptist Church was stifling. The air conditioner was struggling to keep up with the July heat, and the room smelled heavily of setting spray hair gel and the white roses my florist had dropped off an hour earlier. My best friend and makeup artist, Nia, was just blending the final touches of my foundation. I was trying to take deep breaths, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror, trying to quiet the strange, anxious feeling sitting in my stomach. I told myself it was just normal wedding day jitters. I was a 35-year-old senior software developer. I handled high-pressure database migrations for Fortune 500 companies. I was used to stress, but the anxiety gnawing at me today felt different. It felt like a warning. Before Nia could reach for the setting powder, the heavy oak door of the bridal suite swung open without a single knock. It hit the wall with a loud thud. Dominique Jamal's older sister stepped into the room. She was wearing a custom emerald green gown that looked incredibly expensive. I knew exactly how expensive it was because 3 months ago, Dominique came crying to my apartment about how she was going to be evicted from her salon space, and I had quietly paid off her maxed-out credit card so she could keep her business afloat. Now, she was wearing a dress that cost at least $1,000, staring at me with a look of absolute disgust. "Get out," Dominique said, pointing a sharp acrylic nail directly at Nia. Nia paused, the makeup brush suspended in the air. She looked at me through the mirror, her eyebrows raised in shock. "Excuse me," Nia said, her voice tight. "I am not finished with her makeup and the ceremony starts in 45 minutes. "I said get out!" Dominique snapped, taking a step further into the room and crossing her arms. "This is a private family matter. You are just the hired help. Take your little brushes and wait in the hallway until I am done speaking to my future sister-in-law." Nia opened her mouth to argue, her protective instincts flaring up. Nia had been my best friend since college. She knew everything about my relationship with Jamal. She knew how much of the financial burden I carried while Jamal chased his endless string of freelance business ventures. But I did not want a screaming match on my wedding day. I reached up and gently touched Nia on the wrist. "It is okay, Nia," I said calmly, keeping my eyes locked on Dominique in the mirror. "Go wait outside. Give us a few minutes. I will come get you when she is done." Nia glared at Dominique, packed up her essential items, and walked out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, Dominique reached over and turned the deadbolt lock. The loud click echoed in the quiet room. I turned my chair around to face her. I kept my posture straight and my hands folded in my lap. "What is going on, Dominique?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Is something wrong with the groomsmen, or is Jamal looking for me?" Dominique did not answer immediately. She walked slowly around the small room, inspecting the expensive catering spread I had paid for, the designer shoes I had bought for myself, and the heavy silk of my dress. She ran her hand over the back of the sofa, shaking her head with a patronizing smirk on her face. "You really think you have it all figured out, do you not?" Charmaine, Dominique said, stopping right in front of me. "You think because you write code, make a 6-figure salary, and bought that massive house in the suburbs that you are the one pulling the strings. You think you are the prize." I frowned, my heart rate picking up slightly. "I have never said I was pulling any strings, Dominique. Jamal and I are building a life together. We are supposed to be partners. That is why we are getting married today." "Partners." Dominique laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that made my skin crawl. "Do not use those corporate buzzwords with me. This is not one of your tech startups. This is a traditional family. You are marrying a strong black man. Jamal is a king, And in our family, the man is the head of the household. The man leads and the woman follows. I stared at her, genuinely baffled by her sudden hostility. Dominique, what exactly are you trying to say to me right now? The ceremony starts in less than an hour. I do not have time for a lecture on family dynamics. If you have an issue with me, you should have brought it up before today. Oh, I am not here to lecture you, Dominique said, her smirk widening. I am here to make sure we have a clear understanding before you walk down that aisle and legally bind yourself to my brother. You have been walking around with this independent woman attitude for 2 years. You pay for dinners, you buy the cars, you act like you are his mother instead of his woman. It is emasculating. And it ends today. The sheer audacity of her words left me momentarily speechless. I was not emasculating Jamal. I was supporting him. When we met, Jamal was charming and full of big dreams, but he was drowning in debt. I was the one who helped him fix his credit score. I was the one who paid the rent on our apartment so he could focus on building his consulting firm. I was the one who put down $400,000 in cash to buy our future family home. I had done nothing but uplift him, and his family knew it. I took a deep breath, refusing to let her see that her words had stung. I support your brother, because I love him, I said firmly. My success does not diminish his manhood. Jamal knows who I am, and he loves me for it. Dominique rolled her eyes and reached into her expensive designer bag. We will see about that, she muttered. She dug around for a moment and pulled out a neatly folded piece of crisp white printer paper. She held it between her fingers, looking down at me with an expression of pure triumph. You see, Charmaine, my mother and I had a long talk with Jamal last night, Dominique said, her voice dropping to a condescending whisper. We reminded him of who he is and where he comes from. We reminded him that a man needs respect more than he needs a woman with a fat bank account, and he completely agreed with us. In fact, he realized that if this marriage is going to work, there need to be some ground rules, some boundaries to ensure you do not overstep your role as a wife. My stomach plummeted. The anxiety I had been feeling all morning suddenly crystallized into a cold, hard dread. Ground rules. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Dominique took a step forward and slapped the folded piece of paper directly onto the makeup vanity right on top of my bridal bouquet. Read it, she commanded, pointing at the paper. Read it carefully. Because my brother is not walking out to that altar until you agree to every single condition on that list. I looked down at the paper. The title was printed in bold black letters at the very top. It read, Expectations and Duties for the Wife of Jamal Thompson. I felt the blood drain from my face. This had to be a joke, a sick, twisted prank to test my patience on my wedding day. But looking at Dominique's deadly serious expression, I knew it was not a prank. She was entirely serious. You have got to be kidding me, I said, looking back up at her. You and your mother sat down with my fiancé the night before our wedding and typed up a list of rules for me to follow. We did not type it, Dominique corrected me, a nasty smile playing on her lips. Jamal dictated it. I just typed exactly what he said. He knows you have a problem with authority, Charmaine. He knows you like to act like you are better than us because of your job and your money. This is his way of taking back control of his own life. This is his way of putting you in your place before you take his last name. My hands began to shake, not from fear, but from a sudden rising wave of absolute fury. For 2 years, I had bent over backward to be accepted by this family. I had hosted their holiday parties, bought them extravagant gifts, and bailed them out of financial trouble more times than I could count. I had convinced myself that their coldness was just protectiveness over Jamal. I had ignored every single red flag because I believed Jamal loved me enough to defend me. But looking at that piece of paper sitting on my vanity, I realized I had been completely blind. I was not a bride to them. I was an ATM they were trying to reprogram. I reached out and picked up the paper. The paper felt heavy in my hands, loaded with the weight of disrespect and betrayal. I did not unfold it immediately. Instead, I looked up at the ceiling, taking one long, steadying breath to push down the tears that were threatening to spill. I was not going to cry in front of this woman. I was not going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. When I looked back down at Dominique, my vision was perfectly clear and my heart was like ice. All right, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Let us see what my future husband expects from me. I unfolded the crisp paper, the sound loud in the tense silence of the bridal suite. My eyes scanned the typed text. There were bullet points. Actual meticulously formatted bullet points. I cleared my throat and began to read aloud, making sure my voice projected clearly so Dominique could hear every single syllable. Rule number 1. I read keeping my tone completely flat. As the woman of the house and the primary earner, the wife will be responsible for fully funding and preparing the traditional Sunday dinner at Mother Brenda's house every week. This ensures the family remains connected and respects the matriarch. I looked up from the paper. Dominique was smiling, crossing her arms over her expensive green dress. "Do you have a problem with that, Charmaine?" she asked, tilting her head. "It is basic respect. Our mother has cooked for this family her entire life. It is your turn to step up. Since you make the most money, it is only fair that you cover the groceries. Do not tell me a six-figure earner is too cheap to feed her own family." I let out a harsh breath. I work 60 hours a week managing financial risk portfolios for international corporations, Dominique. My Sundays are my only day to rest and prepare for the week ahead. You are telling me that Jamal expects me to spend my one day off grocery shopping for 15 people standing over a hot stove at your mother's house and paying for the privilege to do so, while you and Jamal sit on the couch watching football. You are marrying into a black family, Charmaine. Dominique snapped, her smile vanishing. Sunday dinner is an institution. It is not a financial transaction. It is about love and service. If you are too selfish to serve your husband and his family, maybe you are not ready to be a wife. You want the ring, but you do not want the responsibilities. I did not argue. Arguing with Dominique about her definition of service was pointless when she had not lifted a finger to serve anyone but herself, her entire life. I simply dropped my gaze back to the paper and moved to the next bullet point. The paper was practically burning a hole in my hand, but I needed to see just how deep this delusion went. Rule number 2. I read, my voice growing colder with each word. All annual corporate bonuses and supplemental income earned by the wife must be directly deposited into a joint checking account. Jamal Thompson will be the primary account holder and sole signer. This is to ensure the husband remains the financial head of the household and is not emasculated by the wife's corporate earnings. I stopped reading and stared at the paper. I read the sentence again in my head just to make sure I was not hallucinating. Sole signer. He wanted complete, unchecked control over my bonuses. The bonuses I earned by working late nights, negotiating complex contracts, and navigating a high-pressure male-dominated industry. I slowly raised my eyes to meet Dominique's. She looked incredibly satisfied, as if she had just delivered a masterstroke of financial planning. "Do you realize how insane this sounds?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Jamal wants me to hand over my bonuses, which routinely hit $50,000 a year, into an account where only he has access. It is about respect," Charmaine Dominique countered, taking a step toward me. "You make him feel less than. Every time you pay for a vacation, every time you buy a piece of furniture, you remind him that he is not providing. A real man needs to provide. This account gives him the capital to manage the household finances and fund his business ventures without having to ask you for an allowance like a child. It restores the natural order." "The natural order," I repeated, feeling a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. "Dominique, your brother's last 3 business ventures were complete failures. I funded his dropshipping company that went bankrupt. I paid off the lease on the office space he abandoned after 2 months. He does not know how to manage capital. He knows how to spend it. And now he wants my hard-earned money handed to him on a silver platter so he can play the big man of the house while I do all the actual work." "You are so arrogant," Dominique hissed, her eyes flashing with genuine anger now. "You think your money makes you superior. You think because you sit in an air-conditioned office looking at spreadsheets that you know everything. Jamal is a visionary. He just needs the right backing. As his wife, it is your duty to be that backing without making him feel small. If you truly loved him, you would gladly submit your finances to his leadership." I tightened my grip on the paper, crumpling the edges slightly. Submit my finances to his leadership. The phrase made me sick to my stomach. I had spent my entire 20s building my credit score, saving every extra penny, and investing aggressively so I would never have to depend on anyone. Now, minutes before my wedding, I was being told that my financial independence was a flaw that needed to be corrected. But the absolute worst was yet to come. I forced my eyes down to the final bullet point. It was longer than the others, and the wording was surprisingly legalistic. My stomach clenched as I began to read the final demand. Rule number 3, I read aloud, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. To prove her absolute loyalty to the Thompson family and to ensure generational wealth is protected, the wife agrees to add Mother Brenda Thompson to the deed of the primary residence located at Oakwood Drive by Monday morning following the wedding ceremony. I stopped. The room went completely silent. Only the faint hum of the struggling air conditioner filled the space between us. I read the words again. Oakwood Drive. My house. The house I had closed on 3 weeks ago. The house where I had wired a $400,000 down payment straight from my personal savings account. The house Jamal had not contributed a single dime toward, because his credit score was too low to even be considered on the mortgage application. I looked up. Dominique was watching me like a hawk, waiting for my reaction. She looked tense, her jaw clenched as if she knew this was the ultimate test. "You want me to put your mother on the deed to my house?" I stated, stripping all emotion from my voice. "I want to be very clear about what you are asking. You want me to give your mother legal ownership of an $800,000 property that I paid for." Dominique shifted her weight suddenly, looking a fraction less confident, but she quickly masked it with her usual arrogance. "It is not just your house, Charmaine. It is the family home. Jamal is going to be living there. He is the man of the house. And in our family, we make sure our elders are taken care of. Putting our mother on the deed is a sign of respect and loyalty. It proves that you are truly committing to us, not just keeping one foot out the door in case things go wrong." I stared at her, putting the pieces together. It was not just about respect. It was never about respect. It was about assets. It was about legally binding me to Brenda. Once her name was on that deed, she would own a massive stake in my property. I would not be able to sell it, refinance it, or even make major decisions without her legal consent. It was a trap. A blatant, legally binding trap set right before I walked down the aisle. "Why by Monday morning?" I asked sharply, my analytical brain taking over. "Why the rush? If this is just about familial respect, why is there a strict deadline 48 hours from now?" Dominique's eyes darted away for a split second, a micro-expression of panic that she instantly suppressed. "Because Jamal wants it handled before you leave for the honeymoon," she snapped quickly. "He wants to start the marriage with a clean slate and no lingering business. It is a simple piece of paperwork, Charmaine. You have the lawyer draft it, you sign it, and it is done. If you are really committed to this family, it should not be a problem." I looked down at the paper one last time. The typed words stared back at me, outlining a future of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and complete subservience. They did not want a wife for Jamal. They wanted a host. They wanted someone to fund their lifestyle, absorb their debts, and surrender her hard-earned assets to a family that viewed her success as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I thought about the $400,000 down payment. I thought about the long nights I spent coding, the sacrifices I made, the toxic environment I grew up in that drove me to seek absolute financial security. I had fought too hard to build my life to hand the keys over to a man who used the phrase head of the household to cover up his own insecurities, and a family that treated my bank account like a communal fund. The anxiety that had been sitting in my stomach all morning vanished. It was entirely replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I knew exactly what I was dealing with now. The mask had slipped, and the Thompson family's true intentions were written in black and white on the paper in my hand. I folded the paper precisely in half, then in quarters, making sharp, deliberate creases. I held it tightly in my fist. I looked at Dominique, who was now tapping her foot, waiting for my submission. She expected me to cry. She expected me to argue, to negotiate, or perhaps to reluctantly agree just to avoid ruining the wedding day. Instead, I felt incredibly calm, the kind of calm that comes right before you burn everything to the ground. I took a deep breath, perfectly ready to fight for my freedom, absolutely certain that I was never going to walk down that aisle and marry into this family. The only thing left to do was figure out exactly how I would dismantle their entire plan piece by piece, and ensure they never tried to take advantage of another woman again. I stared right into her eyes, ready to completely flip the script on her ridiculous demands. Let us get one thing strictly clear, Dominique. I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any emotion. You stand in my bridal suite wearing a designer dress that I essentially paid for, and you have the audacity to lecture me about financial submission. She scoffed, crossing her arms tighter. You did not pay for this dress, Charmaine. I bought this with my own money. I took a step closer, invading her space just enough to make her shift her weight back. Really? You bought it with your money? Because as I recall exactly 90 days ago, you were sitting on my living room sofa, hyperventilating. You were crying so hard your mascara ruined one of my throw pillows. You told me the property manager at your salon was changing the locks the very next morning because you were 3 months behind on rent. You begged me not to tell Jamal because you knew he did not have a dime to help you. I wrote you a check for $5,000 right there on the coffee table. Did you use that to save your business? Or did you use it to fund your lifestyle so you could buy that dress to wear to my wedding? Dominique's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of red. Her confident posture broke for a second as her hands dropped to her sides. That was a loan, she snapped, her voice rising an octave. I told you I would pay you back when business picked up. Family helps family. You have all that money, you should not even be counting pennies like that. $5,000 is not pennies, I shot back, my tone razor sharp. But that is the fundamental difference between us, Dominique. You and your brothers see my bank account as a magical well that never runs dry. You think money just falls into my lap because I sit in an air-conditioned office. You have absolutely no idea what it took for me to build my life. I did not grow up in a nice suburban house with parents who could bail me out of my mistakes. I grew up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment with a mother who could barely keep the lights on and the heat running. When the radiators went cold in February, I slept in my winter coat. I worked 3 jobs during college just to afford my textbooks. I clawed my way up the corporate ladder on Wall Street, working 80-hour weeks in a cutthroat environment where nobody looked like me and nobody wanted me to succeed. Every single dollar to my name is a dollar I earned through sheer grit and sleepless nights. I paced in front of the vanity, my wedding dress rustling heavily against the floorboards, pointing a finger at the typed piece of paper. And for the last 2 years I have used the money I bled for to carry your brother. You talk about traditional roles. You talk about Jamal being the provider and the head of the household. Let us look at the reality of his so-called leadership. When his drop-shipping business collapsed, who paid off the suppliers? I did. When his car got repossessed because he spent his car payment on flashy VIP tables at clubs to network who co-signed for a new vehicle and paid the down payment? I did. I am the financial backbone of his entire fake entrepreneurial lifestyle. I am the only reason he can walk around acting like a king. Dominique's eyes widened and she took a defensive step backward, clearly not expecting me to lay out the financial reality so brutally. You are exaggerating, she muttered, shaking her head. Jamal has investments. He has vision. He is just waiting for the right opportunity to break through. You are just trying to tear him down to make yourself feel powerful. He does not have investments, Dominique. He has a delusion of grandeur funded by my paycheck, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low register. And now, this list. This ridiculous, insulting list. You want me to cater Sunday dinners, surrender my corporate bonuses to his bank account, and sign over half of my $800,000 house to your mother. A house I saved for 10 years. A house I put $400,000 down on in cash while your brother contributed absolutely nothing. You want to strip me of my assets and tie me legally to your mother just to ensure you all have a permanent safety net when his next business fails. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off immediately, not giving her a single inch to breathe. I do not want to hear another word about respect or traditional values. You are confusing tradition with financial exploitation. You are trying to hustle me on my wedding day. Dominique glared at me, her chest heaving as she struggled to regain the upper hand. The smugness she had walked in with was badly fractured, but her pride refused to let her back down. You are so incredibly selfish, Charmaine. You have no idea how a real family operates. We protect each other. We elevate the men in our family so they can lead us. You are just a bitter, arrogant woman who is going to end up completely alone with your spreadsheets and your empty house. Jamal deserves a woman who respects him, not a warden who keeps a ledger of his mistakes. I stopped pacing. I stood perfectly still looking at this woman who felt so entitled to my life, my money, and my future. I felt a sudden piercing moment of clarity. I needed to know exactly who was behind this ambush. I needed to know if Jamal was merely a weak man being controlled by his manipulative family, or if he was the architect of this entire nightmare. I walked right up to Dominique, stopping less than 2 feet away from her. I looked her dead in the eye, my gaze burning into hers. I am going to ask you one question, I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room like a surgical blade. And I want the absolute truth. Did Jamal write this list, or is this your own pathetic delusion? Did you and your mother type this up to try and secure your own financial futures? Or did the man I am supposed to marry actually look you in the face and demand my money and my house? The silence in the bridal suite was deafening. I watched Dominique's face closely, waiting for a crack, waiting for her to admit that she was the one trying to extort me. I wanted her to say it was her idea. A small, desperate part of me still wanted to believe that Jamal loved me and that his sister was just a toxic outlier trying to ruin our relationship. But then the corners of Dominique's mouth twitched upward. Her fractured confidence suddenly glued itself back together, returning in full force. A slow, incredibly smug smile spread across her face, radiating pure malice. You really think I am that creative, Charmaine? She asked, letting out a soft, mocking laugh. I told you before I am just the messenger. Jamal dictated every single word of that list to me last night in my mother's kitchen. My breath caught in my throat, but I refused to break eye contact. He paced back and forth. Dominique continued, clearly enjoying the devastating impact of her words. He told us how tired he was of feeling like a guest in his own relationship. He told us he needed to secure his position before he put that ring on your finger. He specifically asked for the house to be put in my mother's name because he knows you are ruthless. He said, and I quote, Charmaine will not hesitate to kick me out on the street the second we have a disagreement. I need leverage. I need collateral. I need to know she cannot just pack up and take everything. She leaned in slightly, her voice dripping with venom. He does not want a partner, Charmaine. He wants a safety deposit box. He dictated the rules, he printed the paper, and he told me to bring it to you right now. He knows exactly what I'm doing. In fact, he is sitting in his suite right now, waiting for me to bring back that paper with your signature on the bottom line. The word slammed into me like a physical blow. Leverage, collateral, safety deposit box. He had not been writing vows last night. He had been plotting a hostile takeover of my assets with his mother and sister. Every sweet word, every promise of a shared future, every kiss we shared over the last 2 years dissolved into nothing but a calculated financial strategy. Jamal was not the victim of a toxic family, he was the ringleader. I looked down at the crumpled piece of paper in my hand. The ink seemed to mock me. This was the man I was going to pledge my life to in less than 40 minutes. A man who viewed my hard work as a threat, my success as a resource, and my home as collateral for his insecurities. Any remaining hesitation, any lingering affection I had for Jamal Thompson evaporated in that exact moment. The love I felt for him died instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I was not going to be a victim. I was not going to be a stepping stone for a man who wanted to break my back so he could stand taller. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just nodded slowly, absorbing the absolute truth of her words. Thank you, Dominique, I said quietly. I really mean that. Thank you for showing me exactly who your brother is before it was too late. Dominique smirked, clearly thinking she had won, thinking my quiet tone was a sign of defeat. So you are going to sign it, she asked, holding out her hand expectantly. Let us get this over with. The photographer wants to take family portraits in 20 minutes. Before I could formulate my next move, before I could tell her exactly where she could shove that piece of paper, the locked door of the bridal suite rattled violently. Someone was trying to get in, someone who had the key. The deadbolt clicked, The brass handle turned and the heavy door pushed open. Brenda, my future mother-in-law, stepped into the room. She was 58 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored silver suit and wearing a wide-brimmed hat that practically screamed matriarch. She surveyed the room with practiced authority, her eyes darting from Dominique's smug face to the crumpled piece of paper in my hand, and finally resting on my completely unbothered expression. I fully expected Brenda to act shocked. I expected her to play the peacemaker to scold Dominique for bringing such a volatile document into the bridal suite minutes before the ceremony. Instead, Brenda calmly closed the door behind her, walked over to the velvet sofa, and gracefully took a seat. She smoothed the creases of her skirt and looked at me with an expression of deep manufactured disappointment. "I see Dominique gave you the agreement," Brenda said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I hoped you would be more understanding, Charmaine. I hoped you would see this as a beautiful opportunity to blend our families and establish a solid foundation for your marriage to my son." I stared at her, the sheer audacity of her words temporarily short-circuiting my brain. "A beautiful opportunity," I repeated, my voice tight. "Brenda, your daughter just handed me a list demanding I surrender my corporate bonuses, cater your Sunday dinners, and sign over half of my $800,000 house to you. You call that an opportunity? I call it extortion." Brenda sighed dramatically, shaking her head as if she were dealing with a petulant child who simply did not understand the ways of the world. "Extortion is such an ugly word," she murmured, waving her hand dismissively. "You are looking at this through the lens of a traumatized, hyper-independent woman. You have spent so much time fighting for survival in the corporate world that you have forgotten how to soften yourself for love. We are not trying to extort you, sweetie. We are trying to help you heal. We are trying to break these toxic cycles of individualism and create a safe space for Black men to thrive." I felt my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. The weaponization of therapy speak was astounding. Brenda was actively trying to gaslight me into believing that my financial boundaries were a symptom of trauma, and that surrendering my assets to her was the cure. "My independence is not a trauma response, Brenda," I said firmly, refusing to let her twist reality. "It is the result of hard work. I built my career. I bought my house. I funded Jamal's life for 2 years. None of that is toxic. What is toxic is your son hiding behind his mother and sister to demand money he did not earn." Brenda stood up, her polite facade cracking just a fraction. Her eyes hardened as she took a step toward me. "You do not understand what it takes to raise a king in a world designed to break him," she said, her voice dropping to a low, intense register. "Jamal is a visionary, but he has been surrounded by women who constantly try to outshine him. When you constantly flaunt your money, when you buy a house and put your name on the deed without including him, you cast a shadow over his masculinity. You make him feel inadequate in his own relationship." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "If his masculinity is threatened because his partner is successful, then his masculinity is incredibly fragile. I am not going to dim my light so Jamal can pretend he is the sun." Brenda stepped even closer, her silver suit practically brushing against the tulle of my wedding dress. She looked at me with a chilling, cold calculation. "That is your problem, Charmaine. You think marriage is an equal partnership. It is not. A smart Black woman knows how to shrink herself so her man can shine. You have to step back and let him take the wheel even if you bought the car. If you refuse to submit to his leadership, you will destroy this family before it even begins." Her words hung in the air, a toxic manifesto of submission and control. Shrink myself. She actually wanted me to shrink myself. She wanted me to hide my intelligence, downplay my accomplishments, and hand over my wealth, so her insecure son could feel like a provider without actually providing anything. I looked from Brenda to Dominique. They were a united front, absolutely convinced of their own twisted righteousness. They truly believed that because I loved Jamal, I would gladly become a martyr for his ego. "You are not asking me to shrink myself," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You are asking me to erase myself. You want me to fund your lifestyle, pay off your debts, and give you the deed to my property, all while pretending it was Jamal's idea so he can feel powerful. You do not view my money as my own. You view it as a communal family asset." "Exactly." Brenda said, her tone suddenly shifting back to that sickeningly sweet maternal cadence. Now you are finally starting to understand how a real family operates. When you marry my son, what is yours becomes his, and what is his belongs to the family. We are building a legacy, Charmaine. We are building a generational empire, and every empire requires sacrifice. Your financial contributions are your sacrifice. My name on the deed of your house is simply a safeguard to ensure that legacy stays within the Thompson bloodline. I stared at her in utter disbelief. She was completely unhinged. The entitlement was so massive, so deeply ingrained that she could not even comprehend how insane her demands sounded. A generational empire built entirely on my paycheck, a legacy secured by stealing my real estate. There is no empire, Brenda, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the room. There is just me paying for everything. And I am done paying. I am not signing this piece of paper. I am not adding you to my deed. And I am certainly not handing my corporate bonuses over to a man who cannot even manage a basic credit card. Brenda's eyes widened in genuine shock, as if the concept of me saying no had never even crossed her mind. Dominique let out a loud, mocking scoff, crossing her arms defensively. You are making a huge mistake, Charmaine, Dominique sneered. You are going to walk out there and embarrass yourself in front of 200 guests because you are too selfish to share your wealth. I am not the one who should be embarrassed, I replied. My gaze locked on Brenda. If anyone is going to be humiliated today, it is the family trying to shake down the bride 10 minutes before the ceremony. I reached for the door handle, fully intending to walk out, find Jamal, and end this entire charade directly to his face. But Brenda shifted her weight, blocking the exit with her body. Her expression was completely devoid of warmth now. It was the look of a predator who realized the prey was trying to escape the trap. You are not going anywhere until we have an understanding, Brenda said coldly. You think you hold all the cards because you have the money. But you are forgetting where we are. You are in my church. You are surrounded by my family and my friends. And you are desperate for this wedding to happen. I am not desperate for anything, I shot back, gripping the crumpled paper in my hand. Get out of my way, Brenda. I am going to see Jamal. Jamal does not want to see you, Brenda said, her voice steady and chillingly calm. In fact, he is currently praying in his suite with Pastor Williams. I had a long conversation with the pastor this morning. I explained the situation to him. I explained how you have been struggling with submission and how you have been hoarding your finances away from your future husband. Pastor Williams completely agrees with our approach. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. They had involved the pastor. They had brought the church leadership into their coercive financial scheme. Brenda reached out and gently patted my shoulder, a gesture that made my skin crawl with absolute revulsion. The ceremony will not begin until that paper is signed. Brenda casually mentioned, a victorious smirk playing on her lips. The pastor will not start the music. Jamal will not walk down the aisle. We will let your guests sit in those pews all day if we have to. You have a choice, Charmaine. Sign the bottom of that list right now, or you can walk out of here and explain to everyone why you ruined your own wedding. I tightly gripped the handle. I looked Brenda directly in the eyes. I was no longer the polite, accommodating woman who had spent 2 years trying to win her affection. Move, I commanded, my voice echoing with a fierce, absolute authority. Brenda hesitated, her confidence wavering for a fraction of a second as she saw the sheer intensity in my stare. I did not wait for her to step aside. I pushed forward, using my shoulder to shove the heavy oak door open, forcing Brenda to stumble back out of the way. Dominique shouted something behind me, but the sound was drowned out by the rushing in my ears. I stepped out of the bridal suite and into the long carpeted hallway of the church. I gathered the heavy silk skirts of my custom wedding dress in both hands, lifting the fabric high enough so I could walk fast. I did not care about the delicate lace. I did not care about my hair or the expensive makeup. I had one singular mission. I marched down the corridor. A few church volunteers and early arriving guests stopped and stared, their mouths hanging open as the bride stormed past them with a look of pure murder on her face. I ignored their whispers. I navigated the familiar layout of the church, heading straight for the groom's suite located at the far end of the eastern wing. The hallway felt like a tunnel. My heart hammered against my ribs, pumping pure adrenaline through my veins. Every step I took cemented my resolve. I was not going to be held hostage by a list of demands. I reached the heavy double doors of the groom's suite. I did not knock. I did not politely ask for a moment of his time. I raised my foot wearing $1,000 designer heel and kicked the door open with enough force to rattle the hinges. The door slammed against the interior wall with a deafening crack. The room instantly fell completely silent. There were 6 men inside, Jamal and his 5 groomsmen. They were not praying with Pastor Williams. They were standing around a leather sofa holding crystal glasses filled with expensive amber liquor, laughing at some joke I had just interrupted. Jamal was standing in the center, looking incredibly handsome in his tailored black tuxedo. But the moment his eyes met mine, his relaxed, confident smile vanished completely. The groomsmen stared at me in absolute shock. A bride was never supposed to see the groom before the ceremony, let alone violently kick the door open 10 minutes before the organ music was supposed to start. Jamal quickly set his glass down on a nearby side table. "Charmaine," he said, his voice tight with sudden panic. "What are you doing here? You are not supposed to be in here." I marched directly toward him. The groomsmen instinctively parted, stepping back to give me a clear path. I did not break eye contact with Jamal. I walked right up to him, stopping mere inches away from his chest. I raised my right hand, holding the tightly folded piece of paper. "You forgot something," I said loudly, making sure every single person in the room could hear my voice. I whipped my arm forward and threw the crumpled list directly at his chest. It hit his crisp white shirt and fell to the floor between his polished shoes. Jamal looked down at the paper and a flash of genuine fear crossed his face. He knew exactly what it was. "What is this?" he stammered, trying to play dumb in front of his friends. "Have you lost your mind? The ceremony starts in a few minutes." "Do not play stupid with me, Jamal," I practically yelled, the anger finally spilling over into my tone. "Did you really think you could send your sister and your mother into my dressing room to shake me down for my money and my real estate right before I walked down the aisle? Did you think I would just smile, sign away my life savings, and hand over the deed to my house just to protect your fragile ego?" The groomsmen exchanged wide-eyed, uncomfortable glances. One of them, Jamal's best man, Derek, cleared his throat and took a step back toward the door. "Hey, man," Derek muttered, looking at Jamal. "Maybe we should step out and give you two a minute." "Nobody is stepping out," I snapped, turning my gaze to Derek for a split second before locking back onto Jamal. "They can stay and hear exactly what kind of man you are. They can hear how you dictated a list of rules demanding complete control over my corporate bonuses. They can hear how you tried to force me to put your mother on the deed of the house I bought with my own cash. You want to be the head of the household so badly, Jamal. So tell them. Tell your friends how you plan to legally trap me into paying off your family for the rest of my life." Jamal's face flushed crimson. His jaw clenched and the veins in his neck bulged. He was completely humiliated, stripped of his king facade in front of the very men he constantly tried to impress. He lunged forward, grabbing me roughly by the upper arm. "Shut your mouth," he hissed under his breath. "You are embarrassing me." He practically dragged me out of the suite, pulling me back into the deserted hallway and pulling the heavy double doors shut behind us. I yanked my arm out of his grasp the second the door clicked shut. "Do not ever touch me like that again," I warned, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Jamal ran his hands over his face, pacing back and forth in the narrow hallway. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, turning to glare at me. "Why are you acting like a crazy person?" My sister was supposed to handle this quietly. "You are out here screaming in front of my boys, making me look like a fool." I stared at him. He was not sorry. He was not apologizing for the demands or the ambush or the sheer disrespect. He was only angry that his friends had witnessed his pathetic scheme. "You made yourself look like a fool the moment you typed up that list," I replied coldly. "You sent your mother and your sister to do your dirty work because you were too much of a coward to ask me for my house yourself." "You are overreacting," Jamal shot back, stepping closer and using his height to try and intimidate me. "It is just a piece of paper, Charmaine. It is just a formality. My mother has anxiety about our future. She just needs some peace of mind knowing that we are a real family and that we are taking care of her." Putting her name on the deed does not mean anything. It is just a symbolic gesture of respect. A symbolic gesture, I repeated, feeling a laugh bubble up in my throat. A laugh devoid of any humor. You think I am stupid, Jamal? I am a financial risk manager. I assess contracts for a living. Putting someone's name on a deed is not a symbolic gesture. It grants them legal equity. It means she owns half of my asset. It means you and your mother could leverage my house for loans or force a sale. Or trap me legally. You see, this is your problem, Jamal sneered, dropping the caring fiancé act entirely. His tone turned nasty, condescending, and cruel. You look at everything like it is a transaction. You do not know how to be a wife. You are too masculine. You always have to be the one in control. I am the man. I am supposed to be the one protecting the assets and managing the family wealth. But you constantly undermine me. You emasculate me by throwing your money in my face. The list was a test. It was a test to see if you could finally humble yourself and respect my authority. Your authority, I echoed, shaking my head in disgust. What authority do you have? You do not pay the mortgage. You do not pay the car note. You do not even pay for your own expensive suits. I pay for everything. I built our entire life while you played businessman. I supported you because I believed in you, but you just wanted a host. You wanted an ATM that you could control. Jamal stepped right up to me, his face inches from mine. If you want to marry me today, he said, his voice cold and hard, you will go back into that room, sign that paper, and apologize to my mother. If you do not, we are done. I am not marrying a woman who refuses to submit to her husband. I looked at the man standing in front of me. I searched his eyes looking for the Jamal I had fallen in love with 2 years ago. The charming, ambitious man who had brought me coffee when I worked late, who had promised me a partnership built on mutual respect. He was entirely gone. Or perhaps he had never existed at all. The man standing before me was a stranger, a manipulative opportunist who believed his gender entitled him to the fruits of my labor. Submit to you, I asked quietly, letting the words hang in the heavy air of the hallway. Why on earth would I submit my financial security to a man who cannot even balance his own checking account? You talk about being the head of the household, but a real leader provides for his family. A real leader does not extort his bride on their wedding day. A real leader does not use his mother as a weapon to steal real estate. You are going to regret this, Jamal warned, pointing a finger directly at my face. You think you are so highly sought after because you have a little bit of money. You are 35 years old, Charmaine. Do you really think there is a line of men waiting to marry a bossy, arrogant woman who refuses to be a traditional wife? You need me. If you walk away today, you are going to end up old, bitter and completely alone in that big empty house of yours. His words were designed to hit my deepest insecurities. He knew how much I had longed for a family of my own. He knew how much I valued companionship after spending so much of my life focused solely on my career. He was using every toxic, manipulative tactic in the book to break me down and force my compliance. But instead of feeling fear, I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of liberation. The fog of manipulation lifted entirely. I saw his insults for what they truly were. Desperation. He was desperate. He needed my money far more than I needed his presence. I am not afraid of being alone, Jamal, I said, my voice steady and resolute. I would rather be alone in a house that I own than be legally bound to a family of leeches who only value me for what they can extract from my bank account. Jamal scoffed, shaking his head. He adjusted his tuxedo jacket, trying to regain his composure. You are throwing a tantrum, he said dismissively. You are emotional. Just take a deep breath, stop acting crazy, and go sign the paper. We have guests waiting. We have a caterer to pay. You are not going to throw away a $50,000 wedding over a simple misunderstanding. It is not a misunderstanding, I stated firmly. It is absolute clarity. You told Dominique I would not hesitate to kick you out on the street the second we had a disagreement, which is why you needed leverage. Well, you were right about one thing. I will not hesitate. Jamal's eyes narrowed. He crossed his arms over his chest, clearly waiting for me to back down. He still believed I was bluffing. He still believed that my desire for the perfect wedding day would override my logical brain. He thought the pressure of the dress, the guests, and the thousands of dollars already spent would force me into submission. He was absolutely catastrophically wrong. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond engagement ring caught the fluorescent lighting of the church hallway, sparkling brilliantly against my dark skin. It was a flawless 3-carat oval-cut diamond set in a heavy platinum band. The ring cost exactly $15,000. Jamal had spent the last 8 months bragging to his friends, his family, and anyone who would listen about how he had gone to a private exclusive jeweler in the city to custom design it. He loved portraying himself as the ultimate romantic provider, a king who spared no expense for his queen. He conveniently omitted the fact that I had transferred exactly $7,500 into his checking account the morning he went to pick it up because his credit card had been brutally declined at the jeweler's terminal. I had paid for half of my own engagement ring to save him from public embarrassment. I slowly reached over with my right hand and gripped the cold metal band. Jamal watched my fingers, his arrogant smirk finally faltering, replaced by a sudden sharp flash of genuine panic. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice suddenly lacking all of its previous conviction. "I am taking away your leverage," I replied smoothly, my voice echoing slightly in the narrow corridor. I slid the heavy platinum band over my knuckle. The physical sensation of the ring leaving my finger felt like heavy iron chains falling off my wrists. I held it up between my thumb and index finger, letting him get a good long look at the symbol of our fake transactional partnership. "You wanted to know if I was willing to walk away, Jamal. You wanted to test my submission. Here is your absolute answer." I opened my fingers. The $15,000 ring plummeted toward the floor. It hit the polished hardwood with a sharp, piercing clink that cut through the silence of the hallway like a gunshot. It bounced once, rolled in a small, perfect circle, and came to a dead stop right next to the toe of his shiny black dress shoes. Jamal stared down at the diamond, completely paralyzed by shock. His groomsmen behind him gasped audibly. Derek, the best man, took a step back, looking absolutely terrified. Jamal could not comprehend what was happening. He had convinced himself that I was so desperate for marriage, so desperate for the illusion of a family, that I would swallow my pride and sign away my financial freedom. He could not fathom that I was actually willing to walk away from the investment. "The wedding is off," I said, my voice ringing with absolute chilling finality. "Tell your mother she can keep her house, and tell your sister she can pay for her own catering." I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on him, grabbed the voluminous layers of my custom silk wedding gown in both hands, and started walking fiercely toward the main sanctuary doors. The heavy fabric rustled loudly against the floor, a sound that felt incredibly powerful, like the march of an invading army. "Charmaine, wait!" Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with sudden desperation. I ignored him. I pushed through the heavy wooden double doors that led out of the private hallway and into the main foyer of the church. The massive space was packed to the brim with our guests. There were at least 150 people mingling, holding printed ceremony programs, sipping water, and waiting patiently to be seated. The low, joyful hum of happy chatter completely died the exact second I burst through the doors. Heads snapped in my direction. Gasps rippled through the beautifully dressed crowd. Aunts and uncles from both sides of the family froze. I was a bride storming away from the altar before the organ music even started. I kept my head held incredibly high. My posture was perfectly straight, my shoulders pushed back, and my eyes locked dead ahead on the massive stained glass front doors of the church. I was not going to let them see me sweat. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Behind me, the hallway doors slammed open with a violent crash. Jamal burst into the foyer. His face flushed a deep, angry red with a mixture of total humiliation and explosive fury. "Charmaine, get back here right now!" he bellowed, completely forgetting his charming, put-together king persona in front of his extended family, his business associates, and our friends. I kept walking, picking up my pace. My high heels clicked sharply against the tile floor. "Excuse me," I said calmly to a group of his older cousins who were standing directly in my path. They quickly stepped aside, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes, absolutely stunned into silence. "You are making a huge mistake!" Jamal screamed, his heavy footsteps echoing loudly as he chased me down the center aisle of the foyer. You think you are better than everyone else. You think your money makes you untouchable. You are nothing but an arrogant, controlling woman who does not know her place. I reached the heavy brass handles of the front doors. I pushed them open with all my strength, and the thick, humid July air hit my face instantly. I stepped out onto the wide stone steps of the church, the bright afternoon sun blinding me for a split second. You are going to die alone. Charmaine, Jamal roared from the doorway, his voice echoing loudly across the packed parking lot. Nobody is ever going to want a woman like you. Nobody wants to marry a financial warden. I paused on the bottom step. I turned around to face him one last time. He stood furiously in the church doorway, sweating profusely. His expensive tuxedo jacket rumpled, his true ugly colors flying high for every single guest to witness. He looked small, petty, and desperate. I smiled. A genuine, radiant, unbothered smile. I would rather die entirely alone than live as your personal bank account, Jamal. I projected my voice so the guests standing near the door could hear every single word. Have a fantastic life. I turned and walked away down the sidewalk. I pulled my phone from the hidden pocket of my silk gown and swiftly opened the Uber app. I requested a premier ride, not caring about the surge pricing. By some absolute stroke of luck, a black SUV was idling just 2 blocks away at a coffee shop. Within 90 seconds, the sleek vehicle pulled up to the curb right in front of me. The driver, an older gentleman with silver hair and a neat suit, stepped out quickly and opened the rear door for me. His eyes went incredibly wide as he took in my massive white dress, my flawless makeup, and the frantic scene at the church behind me, where several people were now spilling out onto the steps, pointing and whispering. "Are you all right, miss?" the driver asked, holding the door steady. "I am perfectly fine," I said, gathering my heavy skirts and sliding gratefully into the cool, air-conditioned leather interior. "Actually, I have never been better in my entire life. Just drive, please. Get me out of here." The driver quickly shut the door, hurried around to the front seat, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb smoothly. As the church and Jamal's stunned family disappeared from my view in the rearview mirror, I leaned back against the headrest, closed my eyes, and let out a long, shuddering exhale. I was out. I was finally free. I had dodged the biggest financial and emotional bullet of my entire existence. Suddenly, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. Then it buzzed again. And again. It was a relentless, vibrating staccato against my palm. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was Jamal calling. I hit the red decline button. 5 seconds later, Dominique's name flashed across the screen. I hit decline again. Then Brenda called. Decline. For the next 25 minutes, as the SUV navigated the highway back toward my safe, quiet suburban house, my phone simply did not stop ringing. It was a barrage of electronic desperation. I watched the missed call counter climb higher and higher. 10 missed calls, 25, 40, 50. By the time the driver pulled into my quiet neighborhood, the counter had reached an astonishing 70 missed calls. 70 separate times they had tried to reach the human ATM they had just foolishly discarded. The phone calls finally stopped, immediately replaced by a flood of voicemail notifications popping up on my screen. I took a deep breath, clicked on the first audio file, putting it on low speaker so the driver could not hear the details but holding it close to my ear. It was Jamal. His voice was completely different now. The screaming anger was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic whining, manipulative sob. "Charmaine, please!" he cried, his voice breaking artificially. "Please pick up the phone. I am so sorry. Dominique took it way too far today. The list was a joke. It was just a stupid test to see how you would react. I never meant for it to actually hurt you. Please turn the car around and come back. Everyone is waiting for us. I love you, baby. Please do not do this to me. We can fix this." I rolled my eyes so hard they hurt and deleted the message. It was classic gaslighting. He was only crying because he realized his free ride was permanently over and his safety net was completely gone. The next voicemail was from his sister Dominique. Her tone was vicious, feral, practically spitting venom through the tiny speaker. You listen to me, you arrogant witch! She shrieked, her voice echoing with rage. You do not get to just walk out on my family and embarrass us like this. The caterers are demanding the final payment for the reception food right now, and the venue manager is asking where you are. I am not paying a single dime for this mess. I will sue you for every single penny of this wedding. I will drag your professional name through the mud online. You are going to pay for humiliating my brother. I deleted her message without a second thought, almost laughing at her profound stupidity. The caterers were already paid in full by my credit card, and the venue contract was entirely under my name. She had zero legal standing whatsoever, but listening to her absolute panic was completely delicious. The third voicemail was from his mother, Brenda. The sweet, manipulative matriarch voice she used in the bridal suite was entirely absent, replaced by raw, unfiltered religious hatred. You are a cursed woman, Charmaine. Brenda hissed, her words dripping with absolute malice. You will never find a good man. You disrespect the natural order of marriage, you disrespect the church, and you disrespect me. You think you won today because you kept your little house and your corporate job. But God sees your wicked, selfish heart. You are a cold, masculine, bitter spinster, and you will rot in that empty house all by yourself. Do not ever show your face near my family again. I deleted the final message, locked my phone screen, and smiled as the Uber pulled into my driveway. They had absolutely no idea what I was going to do to them next. The moment the heavy SUV doors closed, sealing me inside the quiet, air-conditioned interior, the adrenaline that had propelled me down the church aisle began to recede. It was instantly replaced by a sharp, crystalline focus. I was no longer the heartbroken bride who had just walked out on her wedding. The emotional devastation that Jamal expected to crush me was nowhere to be found. Instead, my professional instincts kicked into high gear. I evaluate financial risks for a living. For the past 2 years, I had been emotionally compromised, ignoring the glaring red flags in my own personal ledger because I wanted to believe in love. But now the blinders were entirely off. Jamal and his manipulative family were a catastrophic liability, and it was time to mitigate the damage. I had to lock down my empire before they could launch a counterattack. I pulled my phone from my clutch. My hands were trembling slightly, not from sadness but from pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I bypassed the standard banking app and dialed the Premier client service line directly. I settled into the plush leather seat and listened to the brief classical hold music. Within 20 seconds, a representative answered, "Thank you for calling Premier Services. My name is David. How can I assist you today?" The voice on the other end was professional and calm. "David, I need to make some immediate critical changes to my accounts," I said, keeping my voice low so the driver would not overhear the specific details, but speaking with absolute authority. "First, I need to instantly revoke the authorized user status on all 3 of my platinum credit cards. The user's name is Jamal Thompson." "I can certainly help you with that," David replied. "Let me just pull up your profile. I will need to verify your identity first." I quickly rattled off my social security number, my mother's maiden name, and the answer to my security question. I stared out the tinted window as the suburban highway blurred past. I thought about the thousands of dollars Jamal had swiped on those cards over the last 18 months. Expensive business lunches that never resulted in actual clients. Designer clothes he claimed were essential for networking. The massive tab for the groomsmen's suite at the hotel this very weekend. It was all over. The free ride was officially terminated. "Thank you for verifying," David said. "I see Mr. Thompson listed on your primary rewards card, your travel card, and your business expense account. I am selecting the option to remove him now. Do you want to report his cards as lost or stolen, or simply close his access?" "Close his access immediately," I instructed. "And I want a permanent block placed on his name and social security number across all my accounts. He is never to be added as an authorized user again, under any circumstances. If he attempts to call in and use my account information to authorize a charge, I want the call flagged for fraud." "Understood," David said, the clicking of his keyboard audible through the speaker. "The authorized user has been successfully removed. His cards will be declined immediately if he attempts to swipe them anywhere." "Perfect," I said. "But we are not done, David. This next part is absolutely crucial. I have a scheduled wire transfer set to process first thing Monday morning. It is for the amount of $400,000 originating from my high-yield savings account and directed to a new external joint trust account. I need you to halt that transfer and cancel it entirely. There was a brief pause on the line. I felt my heart skip a beat. That $400,000 was the remaining half of my life savings, the cash I had set aside to fund the joint marital trust Jamal had aggressively insisted we create for our future children. It was the exact pool of money his family had been eyeing, the massive payout they thought they had secured by bullying me into submission in that bridal suite. "Let me locate that pending transfer," David said, his tone growing slightly more serious given the massive sum of money involved. "Ah, I see it here. A wire transfer for $400,000 scheduled for Monday at 8 in the morning Eastern Standard Time. Because this is a high-value wire and it was initiated 48 hours ago. I need to completely void the transaction authorization. Are you certain you want to cancel this transfer right now?" "I am absolutely certain," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Cancel it. Do not let a single dime leave my account." I heard more typing. It felt like an eternity. I pictured Jamal sitting in his hotel suite, realizing his credit cards were dead pieces of plastic, completely unaware that his $400,000 payday was currently evaporating into thin air. "The wire transfer has been successfully canceled," David finally confirmed. "The funds will remain securely in your high-yield savings account. The transaction has been fully voided in our system. Is there anything else you need assistance with today?" "No, David, you have been incredibly helpful. Thank you." I hung up the phone and let out a long, slow breath. The relief was overwhelming. My money was safe, my liquid assets were completely secured, but I was not finished yet. The financial perimeter was locked, but my physical perimeter was still vulnerable. I pulled up my contacts and dialed the 24-hour emergency line for the advanced security company I had hired when I closed on the Oakwood Drive house. The house was supposed to be our marital home. I had paid for the entire property myself, putting down $400,000 in cash. But I had given Jamal a physical key just last week, assuming he would be moving in with me after our honeymoon. I knew he had a physical key on his keyring, but I also knew I had paid extra for a top-of-the-line smart security system that controlled the deadbolts electronically. "Thank you for calling Apex Security," a woman answered promptly. "This is Sarah. How can I secure your property today?" "Sarah, I need an immediate remote reset on my primary residence," I said, switching to my most commanding tone. "My account number is 7429. I need to completely wipe all existing access codes, disable all paired mobile devices except for my own, and lock out the physical key override function." "Let me verify your passcode," Sarah said calmly. I gave her my verbal security phrase. She confirmed my identity and brought up the system dashboard for my house. "I see the property on Oakwood Drive," Sarah said. "I am initiating a master system reset. I am clearing the front door keypad, the garage door keypad, and the back patio smart lock. What would you like your new primary entry code to be?" I quickly gave her a complex new 6-digit code, one that Jamal could never possibly guess. It was not our anniversary. It was not my birthday. It was a random sequence of numbers I used for my most secure corporate encryption files. "New code is set," Sarah confirmed. "I am also seeing another smartphone paired to the security hub. An iPhone registered to a user named Jamal." "Delete it," I said instantly. "Remove his device access completely. He should not be able to view the security cameras, disarm the alarm, or unlock the doors from his phone ever again." "Device removed," Sarah said. "I am also engaging the physical key lockout. This means even if someone has a physical copy of the house key, the electronic deadbolt will not turn unless the correct code is entered or your specific master smartphone is present. Your perimeter is fully secure. The alarm is currently armed in away mode. Would you like me to dispatch a local patrol car to do a drive-by inspection just to be safe?" "Yes, please," I replied. "I expect a hostile individual might try to access the property later today. If anyone other than myself sets foot on that porch, the alarm will sound correct." "Absolutely," Sarah assured me. If the door is tampered with, or if the cameras detect unauthorized motion at the entry points without the code being entered within 30 seconds, the massive siren will activate and the police will be dispatched immediately. Thank you, Sarah. I ended the call and leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. The Uber was cruising down the familiar tree-lined streets of my neighborhood. It was a beautiful, affluent suburb. Huge oak trees cast long shadows over the manicured lawns. I had worked tirelessly to earn my place here. Jamal and his family thought they could just swoop in, use my love as leverage, and take everything I had built. They thought I was just a desperate woman willing to buy a husband. They severely underestimated my ruthlessness when backed into a corner. The black SUV pulled into my wide paver stone driveway. The massive two-story house stood proudly at the end, its dark gray exterior and pristine white trim looking immaculate in the afternoon sun. It was entirely mine, not our house, my house. The driver put the car in park and quickly got out to open my door. I gathered my heavy wedding dress, stepping carefully out of the vehicle. I handed the driver a crisp $100 bill from my emergency cash stash in my clutch. "Thank you for getting me out of there so quickly," I said with a genuine smile. "Have a wonderful day, ma'am," he replied, tipping his head respectfully before getting back into the SUV and driving away. I stood alone in my driveway. The silence of the neighborhood was a stark contrast to the screaming chaos I had left behind at the church. I walked up the pathway to my front door. I reached out and punched my brand new 6-digit code into the sleek black keypad on the door handle. A pleasant green light flashed, and the heavy deadbolt slid back with a satisfying mechanical click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the cool, quiet foyer of my home. I closed the door behind me, engaging the lock once again. I was safe. My finances were secure. The locks were changed, the credit lines were severed, the massive wire transfer was voided. The Thompson family had been completely and totally cut off from their primary funding source. But as I stood there in the entryway, shedding the heavy layers of my wedding dress, a new thought began to crystallize in my mind. The defensive maneuvers were complete. I had protected my empire. But the puzzle pieces of their bizarre, desperate behavior were still floating around in my head. Why were they so incredibly frantic to get Brenda's name on my house deed by Monday morning? Why the absolute panic over a piece of real estate when Jamal claimed he was just trying to secure his masculine pride? I am a risk manager. I investigate financial discrepancies for a living. I follow the money. And right now my professional instincts were screaming at me that this was not just about fragile male ego or toxic family dynamics. This was about something much darker, something highly illegal, something incredibly desperate. I walked straight into my home office, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. I sat down at my massive mahogany desk, still wearing my bridal corset, and opened my laptop. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to find out exactly what the Thompson family was hiding and why they needed my $400,000 so desperately. The silence of the house was absolute. I sat in my home office, the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across my mahogany desk. My wedding dress, or at least the massive skirt of it, lay discarded in the hallway. I was still wearing the heavily boned silk corset, but I hardly felt the tight laces digging into my ribs. My mind was racing, shifting gears from personal betrayal to professional forensic analysis. In my career as a financial risk manager, I evaluated corporate liabilities. I looked for the hidden debts, the buried clauses, the desperate cover-ups that companies tried to hide before a merger. Today, the liability was the man I almost married. I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop. I needed to understand the timeline. Why Monday morning? That specific detail gnawed at me. Dominique had been incredibly insistent that the deed transfer adding Brenda to my property had to be completed by Monday. Jamal had scheduled the $400,000 wire transfer to the joint trust for Monday at 8 in the morning. If this was truly just about Jamal asserting his dominance as the head of the household, or Brenda wanting a symbolic gesture of respect, there would be no strict deadline. Ego does not operate on a business calendar, but banks do. The IRS does. County courthouses do. Monday morning was not a symbolic deadline. It was a legal one. They were frantic. The ambush in the bridal suite was a high-stakes gamble born out of sheer desperation. They needed a massive tangible asset, an $800,000 house with no mortgage, and they needed $500,000 in liquid cash, all legally tied to their names, the second the financial institutions opened for the week. You do not demand that kind of capital overnight, unless you are trying to plug a massive sinking hole. I cracked my knuckles, minimizing my personal email and opening a secure encrypted browser. I paid a premium monthly subscription for advanced public record aggregation software, a tool I use to vet potential corporate clients. It gave me unrestricted access to state business registries, county property tax records, and federal civil court filings. I decided to start from the top of the Thompson family pyramid. I typed Brenda Thompson into the search bar, filtering by her home county. Brenda always acted like she was the wealthy matriarch of a successful dynasty. She lived in a large four-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood, drove a luxury SUV, and hosted lavish Sunday dinners. But as the property records populated on my screen, the illusion shattered instantly. According to the county clerk database, Brenda did not own her home outright, not even close. She had taken out a second mortgage 3 years ago and a third mortgage just last year. The equity in her property was completely negative, but that was not the most alarming part. I scrolled down to the legal notices section. There, filed exactly 21 days ago, was a notice of default. Brenda was 6 months behind on her mortgage payments. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. If she did not produce a massive lump sum to clear the arrears by the end of the month, she was going to lose her house. I leaned back in my chair, the leather squeaking softly. That explained Brenda. She was drowning in debt and about to be evicted. If her name was suddenly attached to my fully paid-off house, she could use her new equity to secure a massive bridge loan, or at least prove to her creditors that she had the assets to restructure her debt. But what about Dominique? What about Jamal? I opened a new tab and searched for Dominique's hair salon. Dominique boasted constantly about being a self-made business owner. I pulled up the state business registry. The salon was registered as a limited liability company. I clicked on the financial filings. The salon had not reported a profit in 3 years. There were 2 outstanding tax liens from the State Department of Revenue for unpaid payroll taxes. The $5,000 I had given her 3 months ago had not saved her business. It had merely delayed the inevitable collapse. The picture was becoming clearer, but the math still did not make sense. Brenda needed maybe $50,000 to stop the foreclosure. Dominique needed perhaps $20,000 to clear her tax liens. Why did they need my entire $400,000 cash wire on Monday? Where was the rest of the money going? The answer had to be Jamal. I typed his full legal name into the federal and state business databases. Jamal always called himself an entrepreneur and a business consultant. Whenever I asked for specifics about his clients or his revenue streams, he gave me vague answers about building portfolios and networking synergy. I hit the search key and waited for the results. My screen filled with a long, dense list of corporate registrations. My eyes widened as I read through them. I was expecting to find 1, maybe 2 failed consulting firms. Instead, I found 7. 7 different limited liability companies, all registered under Jamal Thompson as the primary agent. But that was not the strange part. I looked closely at the filing dates. Every single one of these companies was registered between April of 2020 and August of 2021. I clicked into the first LLC, named Thompson Global Solutions. The registered address was a cheap strip mall mailbox. The listed industry was logistics consulting. I clicked into the second LLC, named Apex Innovations. The address was Brenda's house. The industry was commercial cleaning. I clicked into the third, registered to Dominique's home address, listed as a digital marketing firm. They were all shell companies, ghost corporations with no real websites, no physical storefronts, and no actual employees. And they were all created during the exact window of the global pandemic. My blood ran cold. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together in my mind, forming a terrifying, undeniable picture. As a financial risk manager, I had spent the last 2 years attending corporate seminars about the massive wave of federal financial crimes that occurred during the pandemic. Specifically, the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP loans. The federal government had handed out billions of dollars in forgivable loans to keep small businesses afloat. And thousands of scammers had created fake companies, forged employee payrolls, and stolen millions from the government. I furiously typed the names of Jamal's shell companies into a public database that tracked federal PPP loan disbursements. I held my breath as the search engine loaded. The results popped up, and the numbers were staggering. Thomson Global Solutions had received a forgivable loan of $85,000. Apex Innovations had received $92,000. The fake digital marketing firm had received $78,000. I kept scrolling, matching the shell companies to the federal loan payouts. Dominique's failing hair salon, which barely had 2 chairs, had claimed to have 15 full-time employees and received a loan for $120,000. I grabbed a notepad and a pen from my desk drawer. I quickly added up the numbers. Between Jamal Dominique and the companies registered to Brenda's address, the Thompson family had defrauded the federal government out of nearly $500,000. They had taken the money, spent it on luxury cars, designer dresses, and VIP tables at clubs, and assumed they would never be caught. But the government was clawing the money back. The IRS and the Department of Justice had launched massive task forces to audit and prosecute pandemic loan fraud. If the Thompson family had been audited, if the federal government had demanded proof of their fake employees and their ghost companies, the entire house of cards would have instantly collapsed. That was why they needed my $400,000 on Monday. That was why they needed an $800,000 house to use as collateral. They were not just broke. They were facing federal prison. They had received a demand letter from the government. They were scrambling to pay back the stolen federal funds before criminal indictments were handed down. And I was their designated bailout package. I sat in the quiet of my office, the sheer magnitude of their deception washing over me. They had not just lied to me about their wealth. They had actively planned to make me an unwitting accomplice in a massive federal fraud cover-up by transferring my clean, legally earned money into a joint trust with Jamal and by putting my house in Brenda's name. They were going to use my assets to launder their debt to the federal government. If the IRS seized their accounts, my money would have been seized right along with theirs. I would have lost everything I had ever worked for. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was deeply criminally malicious. Jamal had targeted me. He had seen a successful, financially stable woman and decided to use her as a human shield against federal prosecution. The entire wedding, the rush to the altar, the aggressive demands for financial control, it was all a meticulously calculated scheme to save his own skin. I closed my eyes for a brief second, feeling a wave of absolute disgust, followed immediately by a surge of pure, unfiltered power. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was just a naive woman who would sign any piece of paper to secure a husband. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I opened my eyes and looked at the stack of blank printer paper on my desk. The investigation was over. The defensive phase was complete. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to build a case so airtight, so overwhelmingly documented that the Thompson family would never see the light of day again. I reached for my mouse and clicked the print button on the first federal loan document. It was time to set a trap. The printer in the corner of my office whirred to life, spitting out page after page of federal loan applications, corporate registrations, and tax lien notices. I stood up from my mahogany desk, the heavy silk corset of my wedding dress, feeling like a suit of armor, and walked over to the paper tray. I gathered the warm sheets of paper, grabbed a red highlighter, and spread the documents out across the massive wooden surface of my desk. I needed to map out the exact anatomy of their fraud. I needed to understand the precise mechanics of how the Thompson family had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars and, more importantly, how they planned to use my life savings to cover their tracks. I started with Dominique's hair salon. The application for the Paycheck Protection Program required businesses to submit detailed employee rosters to prove they needed the government funds to maintain their payroll. I scanned the submitted roster attached to her approved loan file. Dominique had claimed 15 full-time employees. She operated out of a tiny 2-chair studio suite. I read the names on the list: John Doe, Jane Smith, Robert Johnson. The names were painfully generic. But as I cross-referenced the employee identification numbers with public databases, a much darker reality emerged. Some of the social security numbers belonged to deceased individuals. Others belonged to people incarcerated in the state penitentiary. Dominique had not just inflated her business numbers. She had committed massive coordinated identity theft to defraud the federal government. I moved on to Jamal's shell companies. Thomson Global Solutions had submitted a roster of 20 consultants. Apex Innovations claimed 30 commercial cleaners. Every single application followed the exact same fraudulent blueprint. Fake names, stolen social security numbers, and fabricated payroll ledgers. Jamal had systematically siphoned nearly $300,000 from a federal relief fund meant to save struggling businesses during a global crisis. He took that money and funded his luxurious lifestyle. He bought the designer suits he wore to our dates. He paid for the extravagant dinners where he courted me. He leased the luxury vehicles he used to project the image of a successful king. The entire foundation of his life and the entire foundation of our relationship was built on stolen federal funds. But the government does not just forget about stolen money. The Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service had spent the last 2 years building massive task forces to claw back the fraudulent pandemic loans. I needed to know exactly how close the feds were to kicking down the Thompson family's front door. I logged into the Federal Court Electronic Records database, a system I used regularly to check for pending litigation against corporate clients. I ran a search for Jamal Thompson, Dominique Thompson, and Brenda Thompson within the Federal District Court. The system loaded for a few agonizing seconds. When the results populated, my breath caught in my throat. There were no criminal indictments yet, but there was a civil asset forfeiture filing. The federal government had flagged the loans associated with Jamal and Dominique's shell companies. The Internal Revenue Service had officially initiated an audit, and they had issued formal subpoenas demanding the immediate production of actual payroll records tax filings and bank statements for the last 3 years. The subpoenas were dated exactly 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago. That was the exact same week Jamal suddenly became incredibly aggressive about moving our wedding date up by 6 months. He had claimed he simply could not wait another day to make me his wife. He had booked the church, ordered the flowers, and rushed the entire process, framing it as a wildly romantic gesture. I had been flattered. I had thought he was just deeply in love. But looking at the dates on the federal subpoenas, the sick, twisted reality washed over me. He was not rushing to the altar out of love. He was racing against a federal indictment clock. I shifted my focus to Brenda. I pulled her property records back up, looking closer at the notice of default I had found earlier. I had initially assumed it was a standard bank foreclosure due to missed mortgage payments. But as I read the fine print of the legal filing, I realized I was completely wrong. It was not a bank initiating the foreclosure. It was the federal government. The filing was a federal tax lien. Because Jamal and Dominique had funneled the stolen Paycheck Protection Program money through the shell company registered to Brenda's home address, the federal government had attached a massive lien directly to her property. They were holding her legally responsible for the fraudulent funds that had moved through her jurisdiction. If the Thompson family could not produce the stolen $500,000 to satisfy the lien, the federal government was going to seize Brenda's house, auction it off, and likely press federal conspiracy charges against her. Brenda, the proud, arrogant matriarch who demanded absolute submission and respect, was staring down the barrel of a multi-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. I sat back in my leather desk chair, the red highlighter slipping from my fingers and rolling across the desk. The sheer calculated evil of their plan was breathtaking. It was a masterpiece of financial manipulation, and I was the designated sacrificial lamb. The entire wedding was nothing more than a high-stakes financial rescue mission. Jamal did not want a wife. He wanted a bailout. He had searched for a successful, financially independent woman with excellent credit and massive cash reserves. He had targeted me because I fit the exact profile of the mark he needed. I had an $800,000 house with no mortgage. I had $400,000 in liquid cash sitting in a high-yield savings account. If I had signed that piece of paper in the bridal suite, if I had walked down the aisle and legally bound myself to Jamal Thompson, my entire life would have been instantly destroyed. The Monday morning deadline for the deed transfer and the cash wire was not arbitrary. It was the exact day the federal grace period expired. They needed my $400,000 to immediately pay back the federal government and make the criminal investigation disappear. But they knew $400,000 was not quite enough to cover the entire stolen amount, plus the massive federal penalties and interest. That was where my house came in. By forcing me to put Brenda's name on the deed of my newly purchased, fully paid off property, they were creating an instant massive asset for her. Brenda could then take that deed straight to a high-risk lender on Monday afternoon, use my house as collateral, and pull out a massive emergency loan to cover the rest of their federal debt. They were going to drain my cash accounts, leverage my real estate, and leave me holding the bag. And because we would have been legally married without a prenuptial agreement, my assets would have been considered marital property. I would have been legally tethered to their massive federal fraud. The Internal Revenue Service would have frozen my accounts. My corporate career would have been instantly terminated the second my employers discovered I was connected to a federal wire fraud ring. I would have lost my home, my savings, my reputation, and my freedom. The emotional betrayal I had felt at the church felt completely insignificant compared to this. Jamal, Dominique, and Brenda had not just tried to humble me or assert their dominance. They had actively conspired to completely annihilate my life to save themselves. They had sat at my dining room table, eaten the food I bought, accepted the gifts I gave, and smiled in my face while secretly plotting to feed me to the federal government. I looked at the stack of highlighted documents. The paper trail was undeniable. The evidence of their identity theft, wire fraud, and federal conspiracy was sitting right in front of me, printed in stark black and white. They thought they had backed me into a corner at the church. They thought I was crying in my Uber, mourning the loss of a beautiful relationship. They had no idea that they had just handed a loaded weapon to a professional risk manager. I picked up my cell phone. I scrolled past the 70 missed calls from my former fiancé and his panicked family. I opened my contacts and searched for a specific name. During my time on Wall Street, I had worked alongside several federal regulators. One of my closest professional contacts was a senior special agent with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. His name was Agent Miller, and his entire department was currently dedicated to hunting down pandemic loan fraudsters. I checked the time on my phone. It was late Saturday afternoon. I knew Agent Miller usually did not answer work calls on the weekend, but I also knew that handing him a fully documented $500,000 federal fraud case with a neat little bow on top would definitely get his attention. I pressed the call button and lifted the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a deep, gruff voice answered. Charmaine, Agent Miller said, sounding slightly surprised. "This is an unexpected call. I thought you were getting married today. There was a slight change of plans, Miller," I said, my voice completely steady and cold as ice. "The wedding is permanently canceled. But I am calling because I have something much more interesting for you. I just uncovered a massive multi-$100,000 Paycheck Protection Program fraud ring operating right here in the suburbs. I have the fake employee rosters, the shell company registration documents, and the federal tax lien notices all sitting on my desk right now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the immediate shift in his demeanor. The casual weekend tone vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of a federal investigator. "You have the actual documentation?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "I have everything," I confirmed, looking down at the red highlighted pages. "The primary orchestrator is my former fiancé, Jamal Thompson. He runs it with his sister Dominique, and they launder the money through properties owned by their mother, Brenda Thompson. They are currently scrambling because your department issued subpoenas 4 weeks ago. They tried to extort me for $500,000 this morning to pay you off." "Do not move," Agent Miller said quickly. "Do not shred anything. Can you digitize those files and send them to my secure federal server right now?" "I will scan them immediately," I replied. "But Miller, I want to make sure these people are not just audited. I want to make sure they are held fully accountable for what they tried to do. They are desperate and they are dangerous." "If the documentation is as solid as you say it is," Agent Miller said, his voice dropping to a grim professional register, "they are not going to get a simple audit, Charmaine. We are going to completely dismantle them. Send me the files. I will review them tonight, and I will get a federal magistrate to fast-track the arrest warrants by Monday morning. I hung up the phone. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. Jamal had wanted to wait until Monday morning to finalize his hostile takeover of my life. I decided to respect his timeline. Monday morning was going to be an incredibly busy day for the Thompson family. But instead of signing over my house and my bank accounts, I was going to serve them a heavy dose of federal justice. I turned back to my laptop, opened my scanner software, and began feeding the documents into the machine piece by piece. I spent the entirety of Saturday evening feeding the documents into the machine piece by piece. Once the digital transmission to Agent Miller was complete and confirmed via a secure encrypted email receipt, I realized I needed a physical manifestation of my vengeance. Digital files were efficient for federal prosecutors, but I wanted something heavy. Something undeniable that I could physically hold in my hands when I faced Jamal again. I walked into my kitchen, brewed a pot of incredibly strong, dark roast coffee, and went back to my office. I pulled a massive 3-inch thick black binder from my supply cabinet. For the next 7 hours, I did not stop moving. I printed out high-resolution color copies of every single fraudulent Paycheck Protection Program loan application. I printed the forged employee rosters highlighting the names of the deceased individuals and incarcerated felons Dominique had used. I printed the state business registrations for Jamal's 7 phantom shell companies. I organized the documents chronologically, inserting heavy-duty plastic dividers with meticulously typed labels for each member of the Thompson family. By the time the sun began to rise on Sunday morning, casting a pale, cold light through my office blinds, the binder was completely assembled. It weighed nearly 5 pounds. It was a dense, heavily researched encyclopedia of their federal crimes. I ran my hand over the smooth, black leather cover, feeling a deep, predatory satisfaction. I had not slept a single minute, but I felt more awake and energized than I had in years. I took a quick shower, changed into a comfortable cashmere lounge set, and prepared for the next critical phase of my counterattack. At exactly 9 in the morning on Sunday, I picked up my phone and dialed the personal cell number of my corporate attorney, Jonathan Hayes. Jonathan was a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who handled all of my personal real estate contracts and corporate liability protections. He answered on the third ring, sounding slightly groggy. "Charmaine," Jonathan said, clearing his throat. "I thought you were on a flight to St. Lucia for your honeymoon right now. Did you lose your passport?" "There is no honeymoon, Jonathan," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "I canceled the wedding yesterday morning right before the ceremony. I need you to listen to me very carefully because we have a massive, immediate legal crisis on our hands. The man I was supposed to marry is currently the primary target of a federal criminal investigation for wire fraud and identity theft. He and his family tried to coerce me into transferring the deed of my Oakwood Drive property into his mother's name yesterday so they could leverage my equity to pay off an impending federal tax lien." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. All traces of sleep vanished from Jonathan's voice instantly. "Are you entirely sure about this, Charmaine? Federal wire fraud is a massive escalation. I have the federal subpoenas and the forged loan documents sitting in a binder on my desk right now," I confirmed. I already transmitted the digital files to a contact at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. They are fast-tracking arrest warrants for tomorrow morning, but I need you to secure my personal legal exposure immediately. I need you to verify that they have absolutely zero legal claim to any of my assets. "Okay, let me get my laptop open," Jonathan said, his keyboard clacking loudly in the background. "Since the wedding did not happen, you are legally single. The Oakwood house is titled solely in your name. You canceled the joint trust wire transfer, correct?" "Yes, the wire was voided yesterday afternoon," I replied. "Jamal's authorized user status on my credit cards is permanently revoked, and the smart locks on the house have been completely changed." "Excellent defensive work," Jonathan muttered, still typing rapidly. "I am logging into the county clerk's digital portal right now just to run a standard title and marital status check. I want to make absolutely sure they did not try to file any fraudulent liens against your property before yesterday." I waited in silence, sipping my coffee. The adrenaline from the night before was still humming in my veins. I felt invincible. But then the rapid clicking of Jonathan's keyboard suddenly stopped. A heavy, ominous silence filled the phone line. Charmaine. Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a low, tight whisper. Did you and Jamal go to the county courthouse last week? No, I answered, a sudden spike of cold dread hitting my stomach. We were supposed to sign the marriage license at the church yesterday after the ceremony. Why? What are you looking at? I am looking at a legally processed, finalized marriage certificate, Jonathan said grimly. It was filed and recorded with the county clerk exactly 8 days ago. It has your printed name, your social security number, and what looks like your signature on the digital scan. According to the state of Connecticut, you and Jamal Thompson are already legally married. The coffee cup in my hand shook, splashing dark liquid onto my desk. I stared blankly at the wall, my brain struggling to process the magnitude of this new betrayal. That is impossible, I breathed. I never signed anything. I never went to the courthouse. He forged my signature. He forged a legal government document to establish marital status before the actual wedding. Jonathan explained, his tone laced with absolute disgust. He knew you might back out if they pushed too hard for the house deed on the wedding day. By filing this forged license a week early, he ensured that even if you walked away from the altar, he would still have a legal claim to your assets under marital property laws. He was trying to trap you in a legal marriage without your consent. The sheer psychopathic level of Jamal's manipulation was staggering. He had not just planned an ambush at the church. He had built a secret legal cage around me a week in advance. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought that even though I had walked out in my wedding dress, he could simply show up with a forged government document and claim half of my net worth. How do we destroy this? I demanded, my voice hardening into a weapon. I am not spending a single day legally bound to a federal criminal. We file for an immediate annulment based on extreme fraud and forgery, Jonathan stated confidently. I will draft the emergency injunction right now. I will have a private investigator pull the security camera footage from the county clerk's office from last week to prove you were not present when he filed it. I will also draft a cease and desist order regarding your property. Have the annulment papers ready by tomorrow morning, I instructed. I want to hand them to him personally. I will have them printed and notarized, Jonathan promised. Are you safe at the house right now? I am perfectly safe, I said. Just get those papers done. I hung up the phone. The discovery of the forged marriage license did not break me. It only fueled the inferno of my rage. Jamal had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He had weaponized the legal system against me, and now I was going to use that exact same system to bury him alive. I picked up my phone again and dialed Agent Miller. It was Sunday afternoon now. I needed to solidify the operational timeline for Monday morning. Miller, I said the second he answered. Tell me you have good news. The magistrate just signed off on the warrants 10 minutes ago, Agent Miller confirmed, sounding incredibly energized. Your documentation was flawless, Charmaine. We have ironclad probable cause for massive federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. The arrest warrants for Jamal Thompson and Dominique Thompson are active. We also have a federal seizure warrant for Brenda Thompson's property. Perfect, I said, a dark smile playing on my lips. Because I just discovered another charge you can add to his list. Jamal forged my signature on a marriage license and filed it with the county clerk last week to illegally establish a claim to my assets. Agent Miller let out a low whistle. This guy just does not know when to stop digging his own grave. That is state-level forgery. But we will happily pass that along to the local district attorney once we have him in federal custody. I know exactly where he is going to be tomorrow morning, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the thick black binder. Jamal is incredibly arrogant, and he thinks he holds a legally binding marriage certificate. He knows I locked him out of the bank accounts and the house yesterday. But because he thinks we are legally married, he is going to assume he has the right to force entry into my home to claim his property. He is going to show up at my front door tomorrow. What time? Agent Miller asked, his professional instincts locking onto the tactical logistics. He usually wakes up late, but given the massive financial panic he is currently experiencing, I guarantee he will be on my porch by 9 in the morning, I calculated. He will likely bring his sister and his mother for intimidation purposes. He thinks I am sitting here crying, completely unaware of his federal crimes and his forged marriage license. He thinks he is coming here to conquer me. Let him think that, Agent Miller said smoothly. Do not engage with him. Do not answer his calls today. Let his arrogance lead him right into our hands. I want to be the one who opens the door, I requested, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. I want him to look me in the eye when his entire life collapses. I want to hand him the annulment papers for his pathetic forged marriage right before you put him in handcuffs. Technically, it is a federal operation. Charmaine Agent Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second. But given the severe nature of the fraud perpetrated against you, and the fact that it is your private property, I will allow it. My team will stage in unmarked vehicles at the end of your street starting at 8 in the morning. I will personally stand inside your foyer, just out of sight from the front door windows. When he shows up and makes his demands, you open the door, deliver your message, and we will handle the rest. Bring enough handcuffs, Miller, I said coldly. Dominique is going to put up a fight, and Brenda is going to try and fake a medical emergency. We will be ready, Agent Miller assured me. Get some rest tonight, Charmaine. Tomorrow is going to be a very big day. I ended the call and placed my phone carefully on the desk. The trap was meticulously set. The steel jaws were open, perfectly concealed, just waiting for the predator to step blindly inside. I looked at the massive black binder sitting in front of me, then glanced out my office window at the peaceful, quiet suburban street. Jamal had spent 2 years manipulating me, draining my resources and plotting my absolute ruin. He had sent his family to humiliate me on my wedding day. He had forged government documents to steal my home. He thought I was just a naive mark, a stepping stone on his path to unearned wealth. He had no idea that he had just declared war on a woman who dismantled corporate fraud for a living. I spent the rest of Sunday in a state of tranquil preparation. I drank tea, listened to classical music, and selected my outfit for Monday morning with forensic precision. I was not going to look like a defeated, heartbroken bride. I was going to look like the executive who had just liquidated his entire existence. The welcoming party was fully arranged. The guests of honor were completely oblivious, and the absolute destruction of the Thompson family was rapidly approaching. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, clear blue sky, completely devoid of the dark clouds that had threatened my wedding weekend. I woke up at 5 in the morning, feeling entirely refreshed. I bypassed my usual casual work-from-home attire and went straight to the back of my closet. I selected a tailored navy blue designer suit. It was the exact suit I wore when I had to deliver devastating financial news to corporate executives. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and my most intimidating black stilettos. I applied my makeup with absolute precision, pulling my hair back into a sleek, severe bun. I did not look like a jilted bride. I looked like an executioner. At exactly 8:45 in the morning, I stood by my kitchen window with a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand. I watched as 3 unmarked black sport utility vehicles rolled silently into my neighborhood. They did not pull into my driveway. Instead, they parked discreetly along the curb at the end of the street, completely blending into the quiet suburban landscape. A few moments later, there was a soft, sharp knock at my back patio door. I disarmed the security system and let Agent Miller inside. He was dressed in a dark tactical windbreaker with the letters IRS printed in bold yellow font across the back, accompanied by 2 heavily armed federal agents. "Good morning," Charmaine, Agent Miller said, stepping into my kitchen and surveying the pristine granite countertops. "You look like you are ready for a hostile takeover." "That is exactly what this is, Miller," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "Have your men stage in the front foyer, completely out of sight from the sidelight windows. They will be here any minute." Agent Miller nodded, motioning for his team to take their positions in the dark shadows of the entryway. I walked over to my kitchen island and placed my tablet on the marble surface, opening the live feed from my front porch security cameras. I watched the screen intently, waiting for the final act of this ridiculous play to begin. I did not have to wait long. At precisely 9 o'clock, a sleek silver Mercedes-Benz turned onto Oakwood Drive. It was the expensive luxury sedan Jamal leased to maintain his fake millionaire image, paid for entirely by the massive wire fraud scheme he was currently running. The car pulled aggressively into my driveway tires, screeching slightly as it came to an abrupt halt. The doors swung open, and the entire Thompson family stepped out onto my immaculate paver stones. Jamal was wearing a sharp gray suit, clearly trying to project an aura of total authority. Dominique stepped out of the passenger side wearing oversized designer sunglasses and holding a massive iced coffee, looking as arrogant as ever. Brenda emerged from the back seat clutching a leather designer handbag, her face set in a deep, permanent scowl. But they were not alone. A fourth person stepped out of a small, battered white work van that had followed the Mercedes into the driveway. It was a man wearing a blue uniform shirt carrying a heavy metal toolbox, a locksmith. I watched the tablet screen as Jamal marched confidently up the front walkway, leading his family toward my porch like a conquering general. He walked straight up to the front door and pulled his keyring from his pocket. He confidently slid his physical key into the smart lock cylinder. I watched his face on the high-definition camera. He turned the key. Nothing happened. The electronic lockout I had engaged with the security company on Saturday afternoon held the deadbolt firmly in place. Jamal frowned, jiggling the key aggressively. He tried turning it the other way, putting his shoulder into the door, but the heavy fiberglass did not budge a single millimeter. "What is wrong with it?" Dominique demanded, standing right behind him with her hands on her hips. "Just open the door, Jamal. We do not have all day to deal with her little temper tantrums." She changed the smart codes, Jamal muttered, his face flushing red with sudden anger, and she engaged the physical lockout. "The key is completely useless." He pulled the key out and hammered his fist violently against the front door. The heavy thuds echoed loudly through the quiet neighborhood. Charmaine Jamal bellowed, his voice muffled but entirely audible through the thick door. "I know you are in there. Open this door right now. You cannot lock me out of my own house." I stood perfectly still in the kitchen, watching his face contort with rage on the monitor. Agent Miller caught my eye from the hallway and gave me a subtle, reassuring nod. I did not move toward the door just yet. I wanted him to scream. I wanted him to completely exhaust his false sense of authority before I ripped it away from him. "You hear me?" Jamal shouted, banging both of his fists against the door now. "This little silent treatment is not going to work. I filed the marriage license last week. We are legally married in the eyes of the state. That means 50% of this property belongs to me. You have absolutely no right to change the locks on a marital asset. I have the legal right to enter my own home. And if you do not open this door in 5 seconds, I am having this locksmith drill straight through your fancy security system." I smiled into my coffee mug. He was practically confessing to his forgery on my front porch security camera, which captured perfectly clear high-definition audio. Dominique pushed her way to the front, leaning close to the door, her face taking up half of my camera screen. She laughed, a high, mocking sound that grated on my nerves. "You really thought you were so smart, did you not, Charmaine?" She sneered, practically spitting the words at the door. "You thought you could just walk out of the church, cancel the bank transfers, and leave my brother with nothing. You are nothing but a stupid corporate drone who got completely outsmarted. You spent all that time reading spreadsheets and you did not even bother to check the county clerk records. You got played, Charmaine. My brother secured his bag a week ago. Now open the door before we call the police and have you legally removed from our property." Brenda stepped up next to her daughter, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet condescension. "Charmaine, sweetie, this is embarrassing for you," Brenda called out. "You are acting like a bitter, hysterical woman. A good wife does not lock her husband out in the cold. You need to humble yourself, open this door, and apologize to Jamal for your behavior on Saturday. Once you sign the deed transfer over to me, we can put all this ugliness behind us and focus on being a family." The sheer audacity of their delusion was almost impressive. They were standing on my porch demanding I apologize to them while actively trying to break into my home to steal my assets to cover up their federal crimes. Jamal turned to the confused locksmith who was standing awkwardly at the bottom of the porch steps, clutching his heavy toolbox. "Drill the lock," Jamal commanded, pointing an angry finger at my front door. "I am the legal resident of this house. My wife is having a mental breakdown and trying to illegally lock me out." Drill the cylinder and get this door open right now. I will pay you double your standard emergency rate." The locksmith hesitated, looking extremely uncomfortable with the screaming match he had just walked into. "Sir, I usually need to see a driver's license or some form of identification that proves your primary residence here before I can destroy a high-security smart lock." "I do not have my updated license yet," Jamal snapped, stepping aggressively toward the poor locksmith. "I just got married, but I have the legal marriage certificate right here in my car, and it clearly states that my wife resides at this address. Now get your drill out and do your job before I leave a terrible review for your company." The locksmith sighed heavily, clearly not wanting to lose the lucrative double-rate job. He trudged up the porch stairs, opened his heavy metal toolbox, and pulled out a massive industrial power drill. He selected a thick titanium drill bit completely designed to rip through solid brass lock cylinders. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen island. The prelude was over. It was time for the main event. I smoothed the front of my navy blue blazer, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked purposefully out of the kitchen. I moved silently down the hallway, passing Agent Miller and his two heavily armed tactical officers, who were pressed tightly against the dark walls of the foyer. I stopped right in front of the heavy fiberglass front door. Outside, I could hear the high-pitched whine of the power drill spinning up as the locksmith prepared to plunge it into my expensive security hardware. Jamal crossed his arms, a smug, victorious smile plastered across his face. "You brought this on yourself, Charmaine," he yelled one last time. I reached out, grasped the cold metal of the door handle, punched in my new 6-digit security override code, and firmly pulled the door open. The sudden movement startled the locksmith so badly that he dropped his heavy power drill, the metal clattering loudly against the wooden porch floorboards. Jamal, Dominique, and Brenda all froze, their eyes locking onto me. I stood perfectly framed in the doorway, blocking their view of the dark foyer behind me. I looked absolutely flawless, completely unbothered, and entirely in control. I did not look like a woman who was terrified of losing her home. Jamal's smug smile widened into a full, arrogant grin. He thought my appearance meant that I had finally surrendered to his threats. He thought he had broken me. Well, well, well. Jamal mocked, adjusting the lapels of his expensive gray suit. "Look who finally decided to act like a rational adult. I told you, Charmaine, you cannot fight the law. The marriage is already on the books. This house is half mine now." He took a confident step forward, fully intending to push past me and walk straight into my home as if he owned the entire world. I raised my left hand, placing it flat against his chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. My touch was light, but it carried the absolute weight of a brick wall. "You are not stepping foot inside my house, Jamal," I said, my voice completely calm, devoid of any shouting or hysteria. Dominique scoffed, rolling her eyes behind her oversized sunglasses. "Oh, please, move out of the way, Charmaine, before we physically move you. You lost, just accept it." "I did not lose anything, Dominique," I replied, locking my eyes entirely onto Jamal's confused face. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a thick, legally binding document folded neatly in thirds. I slapped the paper directly against Jamal's chest. "What is this?" Jamal demanded, looking down at the legal document in his hands. "Those are the emergency annulment papers for the fraudulent marriage license you forged last week," I stated clearly, making sure the locksmith heard every single word. "You are not my husband. You do not own a single inch of this property, and you are officially trespassing." Jamal laughed, a nervous, entirely unconvincing sound. He tried to brush the papers away. "You think a piece of paper is going to stop me from taking what is mine? You are delusional, Charmaine. I am walking into this house right now." He stepped forward again, leaning his weight against my hand, trying to physically force his way past me. I dropped my hand from his chest. I took one single, deliberate step backward into the foyer. "I highly recommend you reconsider that action, Jamal," I said softly. Before he could process my words, the heavy, imposing figure of Agent Miller stepped entirely out of the shadows of the foyer, completely blocking the entrance. The bright morning sun glinted off the bold yellow letters printed across his tactical vest. The two other heavily armed federal agents stepped up right behind him, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. Jamal froze. His arrogant grin vanished instantly, entirely replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated horror. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost standing in the bright morning sunlight. Before Jamal could even process the letters printed on the tactical vests, another figure stepped out from the shadows of my foyer. It was Jonathan, my corporate attorney, holding a sleek leather briefcase. He had slipped in through the back patio door just moments before the Thompson family arrived, ensuring every single legal base was perfectly covered. Jonathan adjusted his glasses and looked at Jamal with the kind of clinical detachment reserved for scraping gum off a shoe. Jamal took a clumsy, stumbling step backward, almost tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. His eyes darted wildly between the heavily armed federal agents, my attorney, and me. The absolute silence on the porch was deafening. Even the locksmith had completely frozen his eyes wide as Saucer's slowly backing away toward his work van, desperately trying to distance himself from the sudden federal presence. "What is this?" Jamal finally choked out his voice, a pathetic high-pitched rasp. "What is going on here?" I stepped forward, completely closing the distance between us. I took the folded legal document I had just pressed against his chest and shoved it roughly into his trembling hand. "Those are your annulment papers, Jamal," I said, my voice projecting clearly in the crisp morning air. "Jonathan filed the emergency injunction the second the courthouse doors opened this morning. The digital timestamp is already recorded. The fraudulent marriage license you forged last week has been completely invalidated. You are not my husband. You are a trespasser. And you have exactly zero claim to a single dime of my net worth or a single square inch of my property." Jamal stared blindly down at the papers in his hand, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked up at me, desperation completely overtaking his features. "Charmaine, please," he stammered. "We can talk about this. You do not understand. I just wanted to make sure we were together. I was just trying to protect our future." "You were trying to protect yourself from a federal indictment," I corrected him sharply, slicing through his pathetic lies. Dominique, who had been completely silent since the federal agents appeared, suddenly pushed her way to the front. Her oversized designer sunglasses slipped down the bridge of her nose, revealing wide, panicked eyes. "What are you talking about?" Dominique demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "What federal indictment? This is a domestic dispute. You cannot just call the government to settle a bad breakup." I did not even look at her. I turned my back on them for exactly 2 seconds, reaching into the entryway console table. I grabbed the massive 5-pound black binder I had spent the entire night assembling. I turned back around and dropped it heavily into the outstretched hands of Agent Miller. The loud thud of the heavy binder hitting his tactical gloves echoed across the porch. "Agent Miller," I said, maintaining my professional, ruthless composure. "As we discussed yesterday, this binder contains the complete, highly detailed financial records of the Thompson family. Inside, you will find the forged employee rosters, the fabricated state business registrations, and the fraudulent tax filings for all 7 shell companies registered to Jamal Thompson and Dominique Thompson. You will also find the bank routing numbers proving they funneled nearly $300,000 of stolen Paycheck Protection Program funds through the limited liability company registered to their mother, Brenda Thompson." Brenda let out a sharp, genuine gasp, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Agent Miller flipped open the heavy binder, his eyes scanning the meticulously highlighted pages. "This is phenomenal work, Charmaine," Agent Miller said, his voice carrying the heavy weight of federal authority. "We have been trying to piece together the exact routing structure of their shell companies for months. You just saved the government hundreds of hours of forensic accounting." Jamal looked like he was going to vomit. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale sheen of sweat across his forehead. How he whispered, staring at the black binder as if it were a bomb about to detonate. "How did you get those files?" "You left a digital trail a mile wide, Jamal," I replied, stepping right up to the edge of the threshold. "You thought because you submitted fake names and used a cheap strip mall mailbox that you were invisible. But you forgot that you were dealing with a woman who dismantles corporate liability for a living. I ran your public tax records yesterday. I saw the massive federal tax lien filed against your mother's house. I saw the federal subpoenas the Internal Revenue Service issued to your fake consulting firms 4 weeks ago." I paused, letting the absolute reality of his situation sink deeply into his panicked brain. I watched his chest heave as he struggled to breathe. "You rushed our wedding!" I continued, my voice cold, sharp, and unforgiving. "You moved the date up by 6 months because the federal grace period was expiring. You tried to force me to put your mother on the deed of my house yesterday because you needed a massive clean asset to secure an emergency bridge loan to pay back the government before the indictments dropped. You typed up that insulting list of wife duties to force me into submission, hoping I would just blindly transfer my $400,000 into your joint account on Monday morning." I leaned in slightly, locking my eyes entirely onto his terrified face, delivering the absolute final blow. "You thought you were marrying an ATM to pay off your federal fraud. But you forgot one thing, Jamal. I evaluate financial risks for a living, and your family was a bad investment." The words hung in the air, a devastating, fatal verdict. Jamal's knees visibly buckled. He stumbled back, catching himself against the brick pillar of the porch. The arrogant king who had chased me out of the church yesterday screaming that I would die alone was completely gone. In his place was a broken, terrified criminal realizing his entire life was over. Dominique completely shattered. The tough, condescending facade she had worn for years evaporated in a single second. She dropped her massive iced coffee onto the porch, the plastic cup shattering and spilling brown liquid all over Jamal's expensive shoes. "This is his fault," Dominique shrieked, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at her brother. The federal agents instantly stepped forward, but she did not even notice them. She turned on Jamal like a rabid animal. "I told you this was a bad idea. I told you we should have just filed for bankruptcy. But you said the fake employees would never be flagged. You said the government was too busy to audit a small hair salon. You dragged me into this. You ruined my life." "Shut up, Dominique!" Jamal hissed, frantically waving his hands as if he could somehow shove her words back into her mouth. "Do not say another word. They are recording us." "I do not care!" Dominique screamed, tears streaming down her face, completely ruining her expensive makeup. She turned toward Agent Miller, holding her hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "I did not mastermind any of this. It was his idea. He created the shell companies. He printed the fake tax forms. I just signed the papers because he told me it was free government money. I will testify against him. I will tell you everything you want to know. Just do not put me in prison." Agent Miller did not look amused. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "We can discuss your cooperation at the federal building, Ms. Thompson. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy against the United States government." Dominique collapsed into loud, ugly sobs as the second federal agent stepped forward, firmly spinning her around and locking the heavy steel cuffs around her wrists. Seeing her daughter in handcuffs completely broke whatever remaining composure Brenda had left. The matriarch, who had calmly demanded I surrender my home to her 24 hours ago, suddenly clutched her chest with both hands. "Oh, Lord," Brenda wailed, her voice trembling dramatically. "My heart, my chest is incredibly tight. I cannot breathe. The stress of this malicious, lying woman is giving me a heart attack." She swayed on her feet, leaning heavily against the railing of the porch, fully expecting the entire scene to stop to accommodate her medical emergency. It was the exact same manipulative tactic she used at family dinners whenever she was losing an argument. Agent Miller simply stared at her, completely unimpressed. "Ma'am," he said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy, "we had an undercover medical unit park at the end of the street specifically for this operation, because Ms. Wilson warned us you had a history of staging medical episodes to avoid confrontation. The paramedics are walking up the driveway right now. They will clear you for transport in about 2 minutes, and then you will be joining your children in federal custody." Brenda's eyes snapped open, the fake pain instantly vanishing from her features. She looked down the driveway and saw 2 paramedics jogging toward the house carrying a medical bag. Realizing her ultimate manipulation tactic had been completely anticipated and neutralized, Brenda simply closed her mouth, glaring at me with a look of pure, unfiltered hatred. Agent Miller turned his attention back to Jamal, who was still backed up against the brick pillar, staring at the annulment papers in his hand, as if they were written in a foreign language. "Jamal Thompson." Agent Miller commanded, stepping aggressively toward him. "You have heard the charges. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Jamal did not fight. He did not run. The absolute magnitude of his failure had paralyzed him completely. He slowly dropped the annulment papers onto the porch floor. He turned around, placing his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. I stood in the doorway of my beautiful, fully paid-off home watching the federal agents march my former fiancé and his toxic family down my driveway. The locksmith, who had quietly packed up his tools during the arrests, practically sprinted to his van and drove away terrified of being questioned. The neighborhood remained quiet, the early morning sun shining brightly over the manicured lawns. The Thompson family was loaded into the back of the dark federal vehicles. Jamal looked back at me one last time through the reinforced glass window of the SUV. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a hollow, terrifying realization of the massive prison sentence waiting for him. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply reached out, grasped the heavy brass handle of my front door, and firmly pulled it shut. The deadbolt clicked into place, locking automatically. My home was secure. My bank accounts were full. My future was entirely my own. The bad investment had been completely liquidated. I turned my back to the door, walked into my pristine kitchen, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. The silence of the house was no longer heavy or lonely. It was the beautiful, peaceful sound of absolute freedom. Later that afternoon, Agent Miller called me to give me the official and final update. Jamal and Dominique had been formally processed at the Federal Detention Center, located downtown. They were being held securely without bail pending their arraignment. Dominique had completely cracked under the pressure of federal interrogation within the first hour. She sang like a very loud canary, handing the investigators every remaining detail about Jamal's shell companies, the forged payroll documents, and the specific bank accounts they used to launder the Paycheck Protection Program funds. Jamal, true to his cowardly and incredibly manipulative nature, tried to blame the entire operation on his sister, claiming he was just a silent partner in her business ventures, but the black binder I had provided contained irrefutable evidence of his digital footprints, his signature on the federal loan applications, and his IP address logging into the banking portals. The forged marriage license added a severe state-level felony charge to his rapidly growing list of federal indictments. Jonathan, my attorney, handled the annulment swiftly. The judge was so appalled by the blatant forgery and the surrounding federal fraud case that the marriage was completely erased from the public record. Within 48 hours, I was legally single, financially untouched, and entirely free from the Thompson family nightmare forever and always. Fast forward exactly 6 months later, and the reality of their actions had entirely caught up with them. The federal prosecutors did not offer them a lenient plea deal. The government was looking to make an example out of pandemic loan fraudsters, and Jamal was the perfect target. He was ultimately convicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge handed down a harsh sentence of 84 months in a federal penitentiary. Dominique received 48 months for her active participation and the blatant identity theft she committed through her salon. The empire they thought they were building was reduced to matching orange jumpsuits and scheduled visitation hours. Brenda did not escape the fallout either, without my $400,000. And the equity of my Oakwood Drive home to bail her out. The federal government moved forward with the tax lien execution. Her massive suburban house was seized and auctioned off to recover the stolen funds. The woman who had demanded I submit to her authority and hand over my assets was now living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, relying entirely on a meager fixed income. Her precious family legacy was completely destroyed by their own greed. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My career flourished without the constant financial drain of funding. Jamal's fake entrepreneurial lifestyle, my savings accounts grew exponentially. I spent my weekends enjoying the peace of my massive home, hosting dinners for genuine friends, and traveling whenever I pleased. The air in my home felt lighter, completely cleansed of the toxic energy that had previously suffocated my ambitions. My life was a testament to the power of walking away. Sitting on my back patio, now watching the sun set over my pristine lawn, I often reflect on the toxic expectations society places on women, particularly Black women. We are constantly fed this dangerous narrative that we need to settle. We are told that our success is intimidating, that our standards are too high, and that we must shrink ourselves to make room for a man's fragile ego. We are pressured to be the ultimate ride or die partners expected to endure financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and toxic family dynamics, all in the name of loyalty. Society tells us that it is our noble duty to build a man from the ground up, to invest our hard-earned capital into his potential, and to carry the heavy burden of generational trauma as if it were a badge of honor. But that narrative is a trap. It is a scam designed to extract our resources and diminish our light. I reject it completely. I choose my own peace over their dysfunction every single time. I refuse to apologize for my success, my independence, or my financial boundaries. Loyalty should never require you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. True partnership is about mutual growth, respect, and shared responsibility. It is not a hostile takeover of your assets under the guise of traditional values. I learned the hard way that protecting your peace sometimes means recognizing that the people claiming to love you are actually your biggest liabilities. You do not owe your bank account to anyone. You do not owe your sanity to a manipulative mother-in-law. And you certainly do not owe your future to a man who views your success as a resource to be exploited. We must stop romanticizing struggle love and start normalizing ruthless self-preservation. My story is proof that you can walk away from a bad deal, no matter how close you are to the altar, and come out entirely victorious. Every time I unlock my front door with my private security code, every time I check my fully secured investment accounts, and every time I enjoy the quiet solitude of my own home, I know I made the absolute best decision of my life. I saved myself from financial ruin and a lifetime of emotional servitude. And I did it without shedding a single tear over a man who never deserved me in the first place. You must learn to stand firm in your absolute worth, ladies. Never let anyone convince you that your hard work belongs to them. Build your empire, protect your castle, and never surrender your crown to a court jester. Have you ever had a partner's family try to use you for your success? How did you shut it down? Let me know in the comments. If you loved watching these scammers get a reality check, hit that like button and subscribe. Remember, ladies, protect your peace and protect your assets.